just so you guys know, if you didn't catch on to that, we do a lot of stuff together, and that's not by accident. We belong to a group called the Gamer Assembly. It's a public group. Anybody can be part of the Gamer Assembly. You just have to go on the internet and like talk to us. It's sort of a peer review group. We shoot the shit. We talk about games we like, what we don't like. We help each other out when we need help. Often that's like, let me just look over this for you and give you some feedback. Other times it's me paying Kate for art or paying Jim for editing, because I know Jim and I trust Jim. And it's sort of like a little, it's not quite a networking group, it's more like a hangout that can lead to other things. There's lots of great stuff like that on the internet. If you're interested in RPG design, check out the Gamer Assembly. Let's get the world building though. But one of the first things I want to talk about, probably not the best thing to start with, but I like to start with it because it's tough, is you're thinking about designing a new world, not working on a world that already exists. I'm guessing that a lot of you guys do this. I'm guessing, well, first of all, how many people in here are GMs? Okay, yeah, right?
Oh yeah, me.
Yeah. A lot of GMs like to design their own world. I'm guessing that you're at least a little bit interested in it because you're here. Even if you're interested in it as a designer.
They defeat everybody in PowerPoint.
Oh yeah. Well, this isn't the mermaid theater. I mean, that's the core of it. Even if you're designing for other GMs, the core of it is often becoming the GM the player is interested in it anyway. So I want to talk about for a little bit why you would create a world that is completely new. Why would you bother when there's so many worlds out there, easily accessible to you? Some of them, are popular and they like copyright is expired on them. Some people like them and you don't have to pay for them and you don't do all this goddamn work. Because it's so much work designing a compelling world. So let's talk about that a little bit. Everybody here sort of worked on this or that. I want to say something real quick. I'll start it off, and that way we can argue.
Good.
Really, I think the only good reason to design a new world is that you found an idea and that you don't yet know of a world that plays with that idea. And that can be really hard. There's a lot of stuff out there. Nobody's going to expect you to read everything, because you can't. There's too much stuff. But if you say, I've got this awesome idea, but it hinges on angels being lizard men. Okay? Right? You might be hard pressed to find that. And if you think that at the very least your players want to play a game about angels or lizard men, then that's the reason to start writing your own world. And that's really the only reason.
I will disagree.
Okay, great, Brandon.
I will disagree partly because as a GM, I constantly have far too many ideas to put into my games and far too few games in which to put into them. So I'll say, it would be awesome if orcs were actually like sort of cultured barbarians who only use spear weapons. And we don't actually have orcs in our campaign. And then I'll have an idea for this neat, water-based world, not water world. But this idea comes in. For me, a lot of my setting ideas are, for lack of a better word, kitchen sink settings, where I'll throw in a bunch of different ideas and say, okay, how can I make all this make sense? How can I forge all this into one setting? Sometimes I come to it more from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sounds like my first one.
Yeah.
My first one was, I was very into Larry Niven and Robert Silverberg. So the first world I designed was a ring world with Skandar on it. So, MASH. And then mixed it in a D&D pod called Eva.
There we go.
But that's another reason for building your own world is if there's a huge amount of stuff published for a setting. As a GM, in my mind, it's kind of an arms race, keeping up with players. Like somebody steps up and says, "Oh, I know what that is," and it's like it's not in this form. So just having a clean slate and setting expectations early that okay, this is something new that you don't know about.
So that's an interesting point. Building a world specifically so your players don't know the world.
Yeah.
And that's a good reason. Brent, I don't think you disagree with me.
I disagree.
There is one other reason to build your own world, and it seems obvious, but maybe it isn't. That reason is the sheer artistic endeavor of building that world, of letting it flow out of you. When you can only game once a week, and there's 6 other days where you can't be rolling the bones, you want to sit with your dice, and you want to have your books, and you want to play with your own world, but there's nothing to do. And one good reason to do that is just let the ideas flow. Just make up one NPC, make them nice and important, and then all of a sudden things will flow from that, or some scary forest, or an horrible sea, or whatever. And just for the pure creative juices to flow when you can't be sitting with your Game of Thrones and playing.
Yeah, I think that's good. I will say this though, if you do that and it ends up being just like the Lord of the Rings, don't expect me to give a shit.
Yeah.
It's totally worth it to do it for yourself,
Yeah.
you know? But we've seen a lot of hacks and reinterpretations and, geez, I don't even know what else you might want to call them, of things that already exist.
Rip-offs?
Yeah, rip-offs, there you go. And people do it because they feel like for whatever reason, like they have more worth than J.R.R. Tolkien. And a lot of those things crash and burn. Sometimes they actually become popular because there was something different and you may not have even realized it at first.
Well, it's a lot like video game design and like level design. When you first get that level editor and you first start playing around with level editing, do not publish the first level you ever wrote. You know, because that's usually you playing around. It's you getting a feel for it. That's great, awesome, do that. But you often want to move on from that, or at least rework that before it actually goes to people. So why we have other folks look at our stuff? Because what's awesome to me, other folks can look and say, that's really creepy. That's like, no. Okay, that's just what
Or that reminds me of,
Yeah.
this or that you may have been completely unaware of that you were copying something.
That has absolutely happened. You know, I was working on the Pulp mechanics, and Brett looked over it at one point, and he says, this is a lot like Risus. And I said, what the hell is Risus? And he was like, oh, it's this free RPG. You can read it online. And I read it, and I said, yes, that is similar. I had no idea this thing existed. And it doesn't devalue the work I did on Pulp. If anything, it makes it stronger, because then I can compare the two. I can say, what is Risus trying to do? Is it exactly the same? No. Does it have similar elements? Good, because people like Risus. But do I need to change things? And those are questions you have to ask yourself. But now we're talking about mechanics. And,
That's tomorrow.
that's another panel. That is tomorrow's panel. System Wars. You'll see a lot of the same faces.
There's one other reason. Egotism.
Oh.
You see something that does the thing that you wanted to do, but it is just terrible, and you want to do something better.
You're not going to change the idea. You're just going to fix the execution.
Yeah, that's where my first setting came from. I found a thing that it makes magic and guns and all kinds of cool stuff, and it was just terrible. And I'm like, man, I really like all these ideas. They're just bad. I'm going to do this but good, and that's what I did.
And then from that, I saw what he did, and that turned into a webcomic.
There we go.
All right. So a lot of these topics are going to flow in together. We did talk a little bit about where you would get started in the design process. Is there anything that people know they want to make a point of saying on that topic?
Yeah, in my mind, there's 4 ways to look at it. There's top down, so you start with, here's an idea for the world, here's how it works, and then you start building details on that. There's bottom up, saying, okay, characters are here, here's what they see, what does that mean? You start building up from there and making the structures. There's both, which is, I think, what everybody kind of does by default. Here's this world, and characters are here, and now we're working together. And then there's basically crowdsourcing, which is you put the stuff out on the table and says, all right, what do you think you see?
Yes.
And you start building it together. So
There's games already like that, like Mindscape, what's the world building Microscope?
Microscope, yeah.
It's a great way to design a game.
Yeah.
So if you just, I guess, bring up that point, there is a game called Microscope, and what this world does is it lets you build a world collaboratively around the table in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does get the creative juices flowing. It's a wonderful mechanic for starting off.
Yep.
that's what we did for Shattered Seas.
That's right.
We
Shattered
put it
Seas.
on Microscope online.
Started Microscope. Dungeon World will do the same thing at a much slower pace. You will build this world not in minutes, but in months. But if you play it as the game instructs you to play it, as the GM, you really only have a couple dots on the map. And as you play through things, you expand that world. And it can be very fun to play that way. Oh, there's Dungeon World. Yeah.
There's a third-party supplement by Pathfinder Games coming out eventually. 13th age, which
Oh, yes, he likes 13th age.
I like 13th age, which incorporates a lot of world building, turns that into actual gameplay with those dice rolls that determine what you can do, how you do it, and so forth, which is very fun.
Mark Truman is doing a game called Trinity where you play gods. And you go, that's one, to that point, that's okay. What's my pantheon? Who hates whom? Who loves whom? What happens?
Yep.
And then what are their realms and all that kind of stuff. He kind of codified that. Then there's one way of starting and saying, okay, you know, assuming you're kind of starting with creation of the gods, okay, what do they create? What do they destroy? All that kind of stuff.
Gods of the New Age does the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Same idea. Hey, one's worthless. So, to me, and then exactly, this is totally an opinion panel, right?
No, it's not.
It is, because you just find all sorts of people who disagree. And if you want to see, like, people who've been doing this for years, like, really disagree too, there's a lot of good resources on that. I'll just quickly touch on them, because we talked a lot of those concepts technically, and we'll answer questions so you can give questions about it. But Kobold Press is sort of the go-to source at this point for books about making games. And they've got the complete guide to game design, and then they've also, recent edition is a complete guide to world building. And it's essays from lots of people in the industry all about these topics. So if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, you can go there after that. Let's talk about collaboration for a minute, because that's what we're got a lot of experience doing. If you guys were in the last panel, you weren't, because you got in line for ours. Because if you were at the last panel, you would not have been able to get into this room. Vincent Baker, who's a brilliant guy, has lots of years of experience. At one point, he said, you cannot collaboratively design a game, which obviously I think is bullshit. I do not agree with Vincent Baker, and he would probably scowl at me, because he's a scowly guy.
Yes.
He is. Yeah, he builds scowly games.
Yes.
But we've done a lot of, at least collaborative world building, if not game design, which can be very, very different. When I did the Midgard Bestiary, let me start there, because that was a really long project. I worked with another guy called Rich Green, whose name is also on the cover of the book, as well as other people. And this was collaborative in a lot of different ways. One, a lot of the new creatures in the book, Rich would design half, I would design the other half, we would edit our own work, we'd go back and forth. But Midgard is an established world. Kobold Press has been publishing Midgard stuff for 5 years. A lot of the stuff in that book started as a 3.5 design, a Pathfinder design for the Green age system, and then we had to somehow get it to work in 4th edition. And tying things together that weren't originally tied together. And so we were working with people that we could not communicate with, people who had designed something 5 years ago. And that's a very strange type of collaboration, because I don't want to insult Ben McFarland by accident. Because I don't want to insult Ben McFarland by accident. He's a good guy, and he's done a lot of great work.
He's good at doing that.
Yeah. And I also don't want to insult Wolfgang Baur, who owns Kobold Press, who's written a lot of these creatures. But I had to edit his dragons because they were no longer any good. His 4th edition had changed so much since he first wrote them. And if I had thrown those dragons in the book, people would have played them and they would have said, these dragons suck. And then they would have blamed me because my name's on the cover. They would not have named and blamed Wolfgang. Yeah. Okay, you know, like,
True. And I would agree with Vincent in that designing a game collaboratively is really different than designing a world collaboratively. The nice thing about a world is it's ridiculously huge. So you can push it out, give it to different people, each one can have different flavors. With a game design, because the mechanics have to all fit together, it's much more important to have one unifying vision. And like Vincent was saying, you can certainly have multiple people working on a game as long as there's one person who says, that fits in, that doesn't. With the world, you have more structure, but one of the things that I think we can talk about is, does there have to be one final decision maker for a world? You know, does that have to be consistent? And I ask that because there are plenty of worlds that we've all played in and that we've all used that were built over the course of many years with many people's involvement, a lot of them sucked. A lot of them didn't fit. Usually when you see a world that really comes together, it's because Monte Cook or somebody sat down and said, no, here it is. You get to write the dragon, and then I get to decide if your dragon works or not.
And where he lives.
Yeah,
exactly.
And that's the way Wizards of the Coast runs their products. There's always somebody who has final say on the world.
Yeah.
But you've got to remember, raise your hand if you play Dungeons and Dragons. Hurrah! Okay, right?
Yeah, there we go.
You know, if you've played 3.5 or 4e, I'm going to point these out especially, because they're built upon decades of history of the game. Even though each of those additions, if you look at the core rule set, even though 4e said there was no world, it was bullshit. There was clearly a world, because there was gods and towns. You know, you've got a world, congratulations. I mean, they always reference back. Even when they say the old history is no good, they still reference it. The Purple Dragon Knights still exist. You know what I mean? The Temple of Elemental Evil exists in all these editions. And they reference what has happened in the past, even though they say they don't. It's bullshit. Because they know there's people playing the games that played them before. And Monte Cook is making the final decision. But he's collaborating not only with people underneath him, but he's paying reverence and paying due to people who have already done it before, who aren't there now. And he's doing it primarily to appease fans. But in a lot of sense, he's doing it to appease himself because he is a fan. Yeah. And you wouldn't design for that world if you didn't want to stay true to it. If Monte Cook really didn't want to write for D&D, he would, design a ridiculous sci-fi world that clearly he didn't think about too much ahead of time and then run Kickstarter for. He would do something like that. Oh, Monte Cook is going to send you tape down. Yeah, tape. But,
from right again.
but let's talk about collaboration a little bit more closely. Because I know you guys collaborate a lot, obviously. You're married and they're around each other. The way that we tend to collaborate is through a wonderful thing called Google. Google Drive, what used to be Google Documents, allows you to have shared Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations up on the web that multiple people can edit at the same time. And you can see what everyone else is doing. It's not just like, where did my sentence go? It's, Jim, why did you delete that sentence? Yeah, and Jim will tell you, because you do not use the Oxford comma properly, and so I read.
One of the ways that we do that in real time is that the Gamer Assembly also maintains a chat server.
Yep.
So we can actually be chatting back and forth with each other at the same time while using Google Docs and carrier pigeons.
And sometimes it's awesome, because we can bounce ideas off each other, and I can see what other people are working on, and it's like, that's a great idea, and I can build off of that. Sometimes it doesn't work out quite the way we hope it's going to work. I'll give you an example. The other day, Brent and I were in the chat room, and Brent says, oh, I'm working on this thing for Whiteboard in the Shattered Seas world, and I have to have this. And I was like, oh, I've already written like 15 pages on that, and I'm not sure that's going to work. But the fact of the matter is that we figured it out before he published something, because once he publishes it, that's it. You know what I mean? Because we're working in two very different mediums on the Shadow World. He's podcasting about it. He's doing sort of like these little radio plays. Yeah. And I'm using it as a basis for a brand new RPG. And that's really different. But we need to keep tabs on each other. Because I want people who like his podcast to like what I'm doing. I want you guys to have that shared sense of worldbuilding. But I've got a friend, Dan. My friend Dan, who's local, is helping me out now. He's writing some stuff for me. And because he's local, we both had Evacuation Day off. In Boston, we get this great holiday called Evacuation Day. It's awesome. And unfortunately, my wife and my kid did not have the day off. So I said, well, I don't need to be at home then. I went to my friend Dan's place, and we just sat at the same table and worked for 10 hours. And he would say, I need help with this. And we'd start shooting the shit on this topic. And it was great to have that face-to-face interaction that I really missed sometimes. That's the way it used to work. You'd be in an office, and that's how you would collaborate. And we don't get that a lot, and you can't quite replicate that with IRC and Google Documents. You can get close, but you can't. I mean, Rich, the guy that did the Bestiary with me, I was in Boston, he was in England. And we wrote a book together. And it worked. It's a great book. You should buy it.
Multiple copies.
I know what you guys did was really different. It was almost like a torch pass. Why don't you talk about that for a second?
Essentially, we created a world called Crione. which I came up with word from the Worldbuilding. Essentially, what I always wanted to see was this really cool action-y scene where you've got soldiers with guns fighting wizards and monks and all kinds of crazy stuff, and the wizards and monks winning. And that was key. But eventually I came to the realization, no, they should work instead of against each other. And that's even cooler. Have a wizard. Have a wizard and a guy in a mech suit fighting a Sith on a dragon. And so I designed that system, or that setting for 4th edition. I just sat down and just started brain vomiting everything I could come up with onto this sheet. And I eventually had a character who was a Sith from another world with an arm like Nightmare from Soul Calibur. I had a person with cybernetic implants who was a sniper and a ranger, like 4th edition ranger.
There's an army you call Riffs.
Yes, there is. And just all kinds of crazy stuff. And this world this post-apocalyptic, reality-falling apart world that I came up with to explain all the weird inconsistencies that I had in this system. Because reality's falling apart, it doesn't matter if these things don't make sense. And so, and my players, they loved it, and I hated one of the players, and I had to stop the game eventually because of that. And she decided, I really like my character, I still want to do stuff with this character.
So I took his setting, and now I'm working on it, still working on it, as my webcomic Experiment 0734, where currently it's following my character in the game, and a few other of the NPCs that we also had in the game as they travel through this world of Crione and try to figure out how to fix it. Eventually. Nowhere near close to that, I'm still introducing characters.
So it was just me and her, we designed everything together. And our characters, I don't design a character, she doesn't design a character. We design each other's characters collaboratively. We talk over these ideas, and I'll message her and like while I'm at work, and like, oh honey, I just thought of your character was one unique thing. She should be the 11th, and she'll go, ooh. Just having somebody who I know so brainly, that I can say, honey, I know this thing that you'll love, and since you like it, and I like it, other people must like it too.
That works.
And this is why we got married, obviously.
My wife just thinks funny when I talk about her.
One thing we should point out while we're talking about collaboration is we've been talking about the world at large, and mainly with words and scripts, But Kate is an artist, and that can really change the way you collaborate. When I was putting together the first Pulp product, you can stop holding it up, they've seen it. Okay, we're gonna hold it up anyway. Open up the Kate's page. I sent Kate a description of a creature, and I said, I need an Ashoka. It's kind of like this, but it's not. It's like a manta ray with a bunch of squid-like tentacles. And she sent me this thing back, and she's like, I made a lamprey, but it's cool, and I like it. And I was like, this is awesome!
Lampreys are terrifying.
Like, I could have said to her, because this is my product. I'm like, well, that's not really what I asked you to do, and I need you to do something different. But that allowed me to think very differently about my product. And if it was like really not what I needed, I would have told her. But it wasn't. Like, it was like, this totally fits the bill and the campaign said. Something like that happened with another artist. Jay, are you even here? Does Jay show up? No, it's all right. So the other artist, I sent her a description for a centipede swarm. It was supposed to be a bunch of centipedes, just like attacking at once. She sent me back a picture of a bunch of centipedes swarming one giant centipede. And I said, yeah! That's awesome! And that is totally in the Shattered Seas now. That's what centipedes do when they swarm. And I read my language again at first I was like, no! That's wrong. That is not what I sent. And then I read the language, like, all right, that's a little vague, I guess.
as a quick suggestion there, if you don't have artists yet, one good thing to do,
Get roofies.
that's Later. Go online and find art. Find the art that inspires you about the setting and use it. It's amazing how often I'll be in the middle of something, I'm stuck. I go back to something I pulled off DeviantArt. Obviously, don't publish it because you don't have rights to it. But to pull it off, go back and like, oh, that's what this feels like. It should feel blue. It should feel sad. It should feel confusing. You know, it should get all these emotions because that art that you collect means something to you, and a setting should mean something. It should have this emotional impact. It shouldn't be, we've seen elves before, yes, but my elves eat people.
So let's talk real quick about one more thing, and then we can totally open this up. Let's talk about knowing when to stop.
Never.
All right. Well,
What is that?
Well, see, and that's a good question because eventually, if you're doing this to run a game, you really never have to stop. Your players are going to change things. You want to be able to respond. You don't have to stop.
Forgotten rounds.
Well, excuse me. If you're doing it to be published, even if you're going to do more books later, eventually you have to stop what you're doing. So like the printer, so your editor can have it, and your layout guy can have it, and the printer can have it, and then you all can have it. And that can be really hard. We designed an early setting that I am embarrassed to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, called 3 Generations After the End. You can download it for free from DriveThruRPG. It's free for a reason, okay?
The more I talk about first setting?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a very cool project to work on, but at one point we got to a point where we did not want to work on it anymore.
We're done.
Yeah, it was like I have other things I need to do, and it seems like there's enough for people to go off of. If you look at it, it's not done. It's not done. There's not enough information in this PDF for you. I mean, you could run a session in it, sure, but you're going to be like, wait, why are there rat men? And how did they get into the city?
If you're asking those sorts of questions, you're not qualified.
I mean, because I haven't read it in a little while, and I don't like reading it. I don't think it's very good. But, I mean, and as a designer, you do want to leave things open-ended. Because you want room for the GM to move, you want room for the story to progress, but you have to have enough. So what do you guys think? When do you stop? At least for now. Yeah, so
I
you
think
still want
that
to.
gets into stop when you still have other ideas.
Okay.
And there could be multiple stops. Like the first stop could be before you do a little bit of playtesting, before you do a little bit of collaboration, before you sort of see how the gel of your world is sticking together.
Yeah.
I think that gets into if you do it for a game versus doing it for a novel or for a webcomic or something like that. Because if you're doing it for something that's done like a novel, you have to have all the answers before you start writing. If you do it for an RPG model.
Well, all the answers that involve the plot. Yeah.
If you're doing it for a game, you can start with a sketch. Say, okay, you're in a town, and here's what happens, and there's a river nearby, and there's orcs. Great, you did it.
Yep.
And you can start building from there. So when do you stop? When it's enough to go on. When you're designing for an RPG, if you're designing something that you're handing off to somebody else to do it, you've got to leave space for the GMs and the players to choose. If everything is detailed, you're going to drive the GM nuts because the GM has to know everything.
And you'll never be done.
And you'll never be done.
And you want your audience to be able to not only feel comfortable in your world, but you should also try to inspire them to want to expand your world, to go to the places where you didn't design. You might talk about a dark forest that's really far away and really hard to get to, but maybe it's time to stop and let that world not be, that part of the world not be finished yet. So you really, it's sort of it's not a suspense thing, but it is something to consider when you're creating the world. You want your audience to be able to expand it, because that's the only way that it becomes popular. If you want to sell such a thing, you need to get other people's creative juices flowing.
Look at what Tolkien did. You know, he really knew what the Shire looked like. Not so clear on some of the other details. You know, you get beyond that stuff, and he comes up with the rolling hills of X and all this kind of stuff, because that's what you did in those old legends. And in those old legends, you would do that because no one ever went beyond, you know, the sunrise. No one went very far. So that was very much, so that's fine. You have all these things you're referencing. But the stuff that players are going to actually use, the stuff that's actually important, that has to be rock solid.
Yeah, there's a difference between writing for you and writing for other people. And you're generally, when you're writing for other people, you're generally going to write more than you show them.
Yes.
You know, because some of it's just so you know, so other things make sense. The Obsidian Portal guys talk about this all the time. Obsidian Portal is a great tool you can get for free on the internet. It's basically a campaign wiki.
Yeah.
And people are always asking them, how do I get my players to read my wiki? And the answer is generally like, well, if they don't want to read your wiki, they're probably not going to read your wiki. Like, you can't make one of your players read 100 pages of text to play in your game. Because that's not fun for most people.
Like characters free stuff.
Oh, there, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, but like, do you really want to bribe them?
Oh no.
Give them enough information that they can play the game, and if they want more information, you have it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my opinion as far as game worlds are concerned.
It's the books and numbers books. You don't have to really play the game, but they're really cool.
You guys have something to think about that?
An anecdote, yeah, anecdote, and then we'll move to questions.
So, Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time author, whatever you think about it. There's a story of someone who wrote to him and asked, are there female orcs in that setting? And he wrote back and said, well, I thought about that, and because there actually are female orcs. And because of how it works, he replied with like a 12-page letter detailing the entire sex lives of his orcs. Because that was just how his brain worked. You know, in order to present them to the reader, he wanted to know how they were sort of socially structured. So he worked all that out in advance because these were one of the main antagonists there. You never saw any of that in books, but that was what he had to have in his brain. Obviously, you don't all have to have all that in there or describe it in an email. It's 12 pages long.
To go into a little bit more detail about how much detail this man put into his world that was never published. Brandon Sanderson, when he took over the Wheel of Time after Robert Jordan's untimely passing, tried typing up all of Robert Jordan's notes, and it crashed not only Word but his computer.
You can only fit so much awesomeness in one place.
So let's open the floor up for questions. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
The two issues I run into I want to make something slightly different.
I'm sorry, did you say groups?
No, when I try running groups.
Groups,
When I
okay.
try running a group, I try to develop something slightly different. The two biggest issues I run into is I have to draw this map. Why is my map so shitty and there's nothing interesting on it?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second is I can do the broad, like these are the factions involved, these are the teams. But when I get down to the actual number crunching of how is these balanced versus bad and money systems, and it's just like, that's where I just like, I'm actually slamming my head. That's what I meant.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can go around that. My first instinct, as far as maps are concerned, and I know you touched on a lot of other points, is you probably don't need a good map. You just need a map that's good enough so your players understand the relative space between things. That being said, the answer to everything else you just mentioned, if you're having trouble with it, steal it. I mean, because you're running a game, right? And other people have done all this stuff. There's no reason why your medieval fantasy game can't use the exact same monetary system as D&D. You already have that book. And just because you wrote a new world doesn't mean that 10 silver pieces can't equal 1 gold piece. 10 pieces of silver do not equal 1 piece of gold, but it's so convenient. You know?
There's a good example of this in the anime series, anime film called When You Meet Sam. They said everything's gonna be original. Everything's gonna be different. The coin system, everything is different in this world because it's about a sort of fantasy world where they've gotten to the point where they're developing rocketry and about to go into space. So they kind of got to that point in their world, but there's still a lot of anachronisms. And the problem was they would make this movie and people were like, what are those little metal things? And they got on the counter. Well, that's coins, but they're little rocks. But that's how coins work in this world. So, there were all these little ways that looked really cool. It was really neat having all these elements, but it was really hard for them to get across what all that meant. So there's a certain amount of, what's the term, multiple targets thing.
Having some familiarity helps your players buy into the stuff that's different. Like, they need to have a place of reference so they know like what's going on. And if everything's different, it's very hard to become invested in your world. I mean, Tolkien stole so much stuff. So much stuff he stole.
Norse mythology.
You know what I mean?
Lord of the
But he did that because there was an audience. I mean, and he didn't realize that. I don't think he realized how big of an audience already existed for that. But he didn't. You don't want to explain what hills are when you're talking about the Shire. You want them to be a point of reference. You know, they have gardens, and they work like gardens. Check it out.
There's a great quote from a director. Science fiction should never be so advanced you don't know what a doorknob is. You know, that's something that doesn't matter. Don't make it weird in science fiction because then folks have no idea what's going on. Figure out what those things are. Don't figure out, well, it's the future, so our matchbooks, the matches have little, like, microchips in them.
No.
You're having the 3 seashell problem?
The 3 seashell problem. Another thing to your point, when I'm designing and I run into a problem, I just start asking why.
Yeah.
Keep figuring out why things
Like
happen.
a 3-year-old. Why?
You know what an economy is? It's somebody willing to pay this much for this thing. That's it. Why are you paying this much and why do they want this? Just those questions.
It's very rare that you have a good reason to redesign an economy. If you've got a good reason, like this is like plot, awesome. If it's don't do it just to make something else different. Don't do it just to make something else different.
And to that question, one easy, obvious way, go to Google Maps, find something, invert it. You know, just zoom somewhere else, invert the colors, and you'll see patterns. Like, oh, there's my continent. And there's my country. You know, it looks like a map. That's the awesome thing.
Or Fractal Mapper from years ago.
Yeah.
You can do the same thing with cities. Zoom into your favorite city. Road map. Trace. There you go, guys.
Yeah.
Or for actual battle maps or world maps, video games. There was someone who was already paid a lot of money to make that. That's not really getting used anymore.
That said, I have never, ever used a detail map. But most of the detail maps are just like, okay, here's a road, here's the city, here's a couple of villages, here's a river going through. And then we just add in little X's.
Using the map as a big flag.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with liking a detailed map. And you can go to wizards.com/D&D. They put up their maps. You don't need a subscription to steal some of their maps. They've got map archives. If you go to the Cartographers Guild.com, where all these people who are like practicing at being map makers put up their maps for free. And if you want to use them in your home campaign, they don't care. They would rather you did not publish them. With some exception. But, like, if you need home,
But it's
they're
Chris
there
for
for
the
a
mill.
reason.
It's Chris for the mill. You can get great ideas just by staring at it.
Yeah.
If you're on G plus 12, fantastic maps.
Yes. Dear God, yes. How about another question? Just in the back there.
Where do you guys draw the line between putting enough detail into your world and also allowing for creativity for your players?
That is an excellent question. I would say this. I would say figure out what's the most important part of the plot you want to do first, right? And that's probably going to be the most detail you put in. And when your player says, I really want to do X, you don't have to do it exactly correct. But you can say, here's where I think that would work. Because you want to engage your players. You don't want to be telling them you're nothing. That is like #1 bad rule of GMing. You want to have room for collaborative play because you're playing a game together. So if you know some things that are unfortunate, great, slap it down. If they see your god, the god that you wrote, that got a fire, and they say, I really like this god, but I really need an agriculture hook. I mean, if it's really important to your plot that somebody else has the agriculture hook, tell them, well, this is important to my plot. But if it's not, awesome. That god of war and fire also is the god of agriculture. There's no good reason to say no. Just because you didn't think of it. You know what I mean? It's instant player investment. The player is invested in this god. And might even come up with more stuff for you to play off of. You know? It's free. It's them telling you for free what they want to do in your game. Which is one of the hardest things to get your players to tell you. So if they have an idea, even if you can't use it exactly, try to use it somehow. That's great. It's a hard balance.
If you're doing runtime stuff, if you're just running a game, that's great. If you're trying to publish a game, I'd stick with a little more general. But a lot of what I do is typically runtime stuff. One of my side projects is Schrödinger's GMing, And it's basically, the idea behind that is, nothing is real until the players experience it. So if you have all this stuff worked up and they say, well, I think it does this, don't be afraid to jump on that and go with it.
Yep. That's kind of the reason I always say companies still have ideas. If you're constantly tweaking, updating, adding new things, by the time you hand that thing to your players, it's here's the Blu-ray version of the original Star Wars trilogy. You come up with too much if you're a creative type, and if you still have room for innovation in there, so you're friends.
And to that point, if it makes you feel any better, I just got finished reading The Making of Star Wars, which is this big biography about, but it's not a biography. Star Wars isn't real. They were tweaking that movie up to like the day before. They were still trying to figure out how do we get this across? Who's there, who's not there. This character is dropped out. And it wasn't, some of it was because of budgetary reasons, some of it was because that doesn't make sense anymore. This isn't worthwhile. So even, these things that we all know and love go through a lot of evolution, a lot of work before you figure out what it's actually going to be.
And they do a really awesome thing in the Star Wars universe. Some people might not like it, but I think it's awesome. Where the movies are canon. Everything else isn't until they steal it and put it in a movie.
Yes.
That is the rule of the Star Wars universe. Like, if you get hired to write a Star Wars book, they'll give you, your outline, whatever. They will approve everything you put in that book, even though it's not canon. And then when they go to finally do something, like this, they do this with the prequels.
Yeah.
They'll say, you know what? That was a great idea in that book. And they're gonna they put it in.
Yeah.
And and so they only take what they like.
Yep.
That's a hard analogy for building your world, but you can totally do it. It's all about taking what's important or stealing what you like. If you're running at your game table and you just bought the Neverwinter campaign guide from WotC, which is a beautiful book, you're probably not going. You're probably not going to drop the whole city of Neverwinter into your campaign book because it would be weird if a new city just suddenly showed up. But if you really like this, and this, that's what you take.
Always summer.
Always summer.
There we go.
Absolutely.
I find whenever I set out to build a world, usually because I have a story that I want to tell and I can't fit it in, I can't set it for one reason or another. But world building like that also presents problems because sometimes there's just a few things you have to change, or sometimes there are things that make the world so radically different that it gets even harder to adapt into a system that'll work. So where do you think you go from when you have to start adapting rules for a system?
First off, bring that question tomorrow.
And what also it affects how you build your world.
The mechanics you use absolutely affect your world to an extent. There's not many people on this panel, wait till tomorrow, that are going to tell you not to hack the mechanics. We've all written content at some point, whether it's a new monster or whatever. You're just shaking your head at me. Well, there's affirmative now.
I disagree.
I have written material for other systems. I'm all about that. I was doing it before they were paying me to do it. Obviously, if you need something new, that's great. I always tell my players that when we're at the game table, say we're playing D&D 4th edition, they've got a bunch of monster manuals. That's great. I don't care. They know up front that the troll in the monster manual might not be the troll I'm using. And as long as they know, it's part of your social contract. And so they know they can't make assumptions. And if they want to make sure that fire is going to work to stop that troll from healing, they're going to either say, do I know that, or do I need to make a knowledge check for that? And they know. So I would say absolutely hack. Hack carefully. Don't be afraid to admit something didn't work. If you build this great mechanic for a train robbery scene, because there just wasn't one in the system that you're using, because very few rule systems have train robbery mechanics. It's an awfully complicated thing, and you run it, and it sucked, right? First of all, tell your players, I wrote these mechanics, and obviously they've never been tested. Second of all, don't be afraid to throw them out. This isn't working, and I want you to have fun. Unless you're doing it specifically for playtesting, because you want to publish it later, you don't have to go through go through with it if it's not working.
And so there's a couple of things to do that. One is to, now, this is something that's turned out to be very controversial. I have people like screaming and yelling at me online for saying that, but then I have to go with online anyway. It's the internet, yeah. But I'll be upfront with my players of saying, you know, halfway through a combat that's not working out and there's something wrong, I'll just step back and say, yeah, I will. Do you need an assistant to show up right now? You know, do you need something to happen externally to fix this? And often they'll say, no, we want to make this work. But sometimes they're like, you know, this isn't fun. This really sucks. I'm like, fine. We will cut to the end, you know, whatever, and we'll find some other way. I would much rather have, you know, that combat last an hour or less and do an hour's worth of more interesting things later and make that work than grind through this thing that nobody's enjoying. And so you ask. And then,
go ahead. Go ahead, you finish.
Okay. And then also you can always come back to it. You can always come back and say, so here are these things. All right, the numbers were off. All the numbers are tweaked. We can try it again. So you can always come back and say, it didn't work. Is that because it fundamentally doesn't fit the system, or because I need to rethink how that works?
I don't like that.
Fair enough.
And a lot of people either don't like that. If something's not working, like I said, you do need to stop sometimes and, you know, maybe go away for now or adapt. But I very rarely will want to stop in the middle of a fight and say something to my players like, do you need assistance? I don't want a deus ex machina if I don't need one. And I don't want my players to know there is a deus ex machina if I can hide it from them. Because that really breaks immersion in my experience. I would rather all of a sudden adjust the stats on the fly and have that ridiculously overpowered troll. I didn't know he was ridiculously overpowered, but obviously he is. Suddenly be less overpowered so I can move forward. Because I know something is broken. If the players just make bad decisions, I will often just let them die. And that's part of my social contract with my players. They know that's a possibility. Because there's always something else to do. You fight to the last man, then you chose to fight to the last man. And that's a whole other ball of cheese ball. Ball of cheese. That sounds so
To your rules question, again, it just keeps, I keep asking why. Why does something work? How does something not work? If you're having a setting which is Vancian in Magic, where you cast spells on, and then suddenly change to something else where the spell points, and they cast spells all day, that's going to change things. You just got to figure out what the ramifications for that, and just keep going down and asking why.
Good. And to the point we just had, if we are going to break character and then discuss something, I like to do that at the end. So I don't. It's not that I don't want to discuss it. It's that I don't want to interrupt what we're doing.
Oh, you're wrong.
Yeah, you're right.
That's the doctor.
Yeah.
Is it better to guide your players with standard, keep them on the track of your storyline, and always keep going left? To keep them in your storyline, or if they decide that they're going to go right, just recreate something brand new in front of them?
That is completely a personal preference.
Yeah.
And not just of your own, but of your players. Yes. Like those are totally valid ways to play.
But that's one of the awesome values of doing your own world building, is that there's some place to go when the players don't go where you want.
Yep.
And if you don't have it, you're going to be more likely to funnel them down the pipe. If it's there, send them over there. You can always move this encounter's worth of bad guys, whatever the system is, to that new space.
And having a NPC column favorite, that's one of my favorites. I think do this job for me, I'm not busy, I did that for you last year.
I have games where I had absolutely no plan for what anyone was going to do. All I had was a list of NPCs that they could run into, a list of problems in the city, and I let them run loose.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't even do that last year.
Yeah, she did that.
I had no practice.
We
That was a fun game.
We ended up Space Cleveland stealing a Mako tank from the Klingons and fought the Angry Birds.
That's right. It was great.
Besides this, we didn't do anything on that.
Right, yes. There was no Come Out Jack. 4th edition.
But let me say this. I mean, this isn't about Railroad versus Sandbox, which is normally the way that argument breaks down. Do you want them to follow the plot line, or do you want them to be more free to go in the directions they want to go? If you're going to very strictly railroad your players, where you want to make sure they follow this plot, tell them before they sit down at the table that I want to run this adventure. You don't have to tell them the plot of the adventure. You don't have to be like, the king is really the devil. Like, but let them know. Like there is, like I have an adventure written out, and there is a story that I'm going to try to keep you on the path of. Because it's a social contract for these players. You want to make sure they have fun, and one of the ways they have fun is they know what they're getting into.
Think with a Pulp story. Pulp stories are pretty straightforward. You kind of know what's going to happen. That's part of the fun. There's a villain. We're going to defeat the villain. Mm-hmm. You know, when you let the players know that's kind of where we're going, is there's going to be a big Pulp story about the clash between rebellion and empire. They know what's going on. They can have fun with that, as opposed to them saying, well, what should we do? Should we try to build up the rebellion for the next 10 years? What, you know, so that's
There's a big difference between telling your players that we're going to play a game set during the Elven Civil War, and telling your players that we're going to play in a campaign where you assassinate the king to turn the tides of the Elven Civil War. Right. You know, because now they know this is the goal, this is the plot. Whereas we get to explore this whole dynamic environment.
Obviously, he's investing in that. Then you see could be a god.
Yep. Yes. Yep. Good question.
I don't know if there's a simple answer sort of GM related. Give me a specific example. I have a world where Avalanche are cutting the whole planet to piece so they can take it over easily later. And I put out that one of my players created, like they use these talents that I want more fun to display. And one created a whole backstory for the Elven Society. It was a secret civil war going on, which is sort of at odds with what was going on. So I guess the question is, where do you kind of draw the line in collaboration with players where you have a story you kind of want to tell, but you want them to be immersed and engaged in
it's a problem because you asked for it. You know what I mean? Like you told them, like, I want you to help create, can you create this town or X? And apparently the parameters you set at least weren't clear to the player. Maybe they were clear to you, but they weren't clear to the player because they didn't give you what you asked for, as far as you're concerned. Now, I would say this, try to make it work as best you can. Because they obviously put work into it, and their work is valuable. If you can't make it work, maybe what you do is you say, I can use this and this, but maybe, let's run this after. Right? Because there's a whole plot, it sounds like there's a whole plot there going on. And but it's at odds, which means you may, it's not going to fit, if it's not going to fit into this campaign, it could be the next one.
It also depends on your contract with players. If you ask for stuff and they give it to you, you say, great, thank you, come on Monday. And they don't know how much of that's going to be incorporated. That's absolutely cool. That's part of going back and forth saying, what you provided is going to be grist to the mill, but I can't include every single thing you can possibly add.
But you need to tell them that. You want to tell them that what you're writing up, I'm going to use stuff from, not necessarily all of it. If you don't tell them that, they assume that they're providing you material that is canon.
Every single NPC will show up at some point.
And we learned by failing.
Yeah.
So if it really didn't work out, it's totally, because this is your friend, theoretically. And it is okay to say to your friends, apparently I was not clear. And be honest. Be honest, because these are your friends. And you want to keep playing with these people. And it's okay that you made mistakes. Some DMs don't like to admit they made mistakes. I don't like to do it in the middle of a session. But sometimes, I want to be on the same page with my players, at least to a degree. Like, obviously, keeping some things from them because that's fun. But I want them to know where I'm coming from. I want to make sure we're all having fun. Okay.
Sure.
Yep. Yeah. Sure.
Actually, I was that player. I handed my game a 15-page document when I drafted it. It was actually good. And he looked at me like, what the fuck? I handed it 5 minutes for the session, so I was, I forgot to give you this.
Could everyone do me a quick favor? If you ask the question, can you raise your hand real quick? Well, how many is that? 4? All right.
Can I find a t-shirt for the girl on the left?
Using arithmetic. I have devised that there are 5.
Okay. So what's this about?
We want to see the picture tomorrow.
Okay. Well, do me We've got a Pulp.
You got stuff?
We don't have this. We've not that. I know.
While they're getting out, one last question. We have a few more minutes. You're handing up first.
I've made large cities, I've made traveling sections, but it just feels like they traveled 3 days in the course of 20 minutes game time.
How do you make the world feel big? That's a very good question. One answer to that is depends on how you define big. The other person sorry. No, not in that sense. Ew. Someone else take this one.
They use it for Lord of the Rings while they're traveling.
Yeah, it's hard. It's all about the story you're telling at the table with people. If you want the world to feel big, one of the ways to do it is to tell your players you want the world to feel big, and they'll make bigger choices. Like, I want to run an epic. If you say you want to run an epic campaign, they'll start thinking epic.
Yeah.
And that is totally an acceptable way to do that.
Also make things physically big and weird.
Yeah.
You know, you are approaching a pyramid. It takes you an hour and it's still the same size.
Yeah.
You know, and you're just going, and this thing is literally 1,000 feet high.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the rats that you created that have radioactive laser eyes can start biting at their ankles on the way.
Yes.
You know, we make it so that, so even, especially if you're gaming, you can not let them get to tonight's goal.
Yeah.
Have something ready inside the world for them, and don't let them get there. Let them be frustrated because they want to get there.
Yep.
You see the pyramid, but you don't get there.
Two things to that point. If you look up for Raid Managers, what the heck was Dungeoncraft? It was a series that ran in Dragon Magazine. I think John King has it online for free. Take a look at that. And one of the points he makes is everything has 2 facts and a secret. And every time you create anything, 2 facts and a secret. And everybody is trying to do something, which means that everybody they meet, everybody wants something from it. Whether they know it or not, whether they're going to come back and stealing with it later, just make it, if you make it that detailed, it's going to feel big because, oh my God, there's all this stuff going on. That's
All
what
right. Show me those hands up if you asked a question. I don't care. You take this. All right, that's my game. Here, you take this. Send me an email. I'm going to send you my next product. Give me those hands again. Who asked the question? Right? Real quick. Thank you for asking questions. Here, send me an email. Send you my next product. And here's the book. And you can trade amongst people. Yeah. Here, have a t-shirt. We're the Gamer Assembly. You can find us on gamerassembly.net. You can probably Google our names on the program. More stuff. We want to thank you guys all for coming. We've got another panel tomorrow. It's called Tabletop System Wars, where we're going to argue about which system you should be using to run your awesome idea.